Chapter 1. The calm before the storm. The Texas heat in late June had a way of slowing life down. The air felt heavy, the sun hung lazily in the sky, and the cicadas sang their never-ending chorus. For most people, it was just another summer in Austin. For John Miller, it was the summer his marriage quietly began to unravel. John was 38 years old. A tall man with broad shoulders and the kind of easy confidence that came from building something with his own hands. As an architect, he'd spent years designing other people's dream homes while making his own. Two-story colonial in Barton Hills, the picture of suburban perfection. White shutters, red brick, manicured lawnette, could have been in a Hallmark movie. His wife, Emily, was 35. Beautiful in that polished, Instagram-ready way. Long blonde hair, bright smile. Wardrobe that said, "I'm successful, but approachable." They'd been married for 8 years. No kids by choice. Emily liked to say she was focusing on her career at the marketing firm where she worked as a senior account manager. John respected that. He believed in her ambition. But ambition wasn't the only thing she'd been focusing on lately. It started small. 3 weeks ago, Emily had begun working late more often. Marketing deadlines, she'd said. A new campaign, a demanding client, the usual excuses that didn't set off alarm bells at first. But John wasn't a fool. One evening, as he was setting the table for dinner, he heard her phone buzz on the counter. She was upstairs, blow-drying her hair. Normally, he didn't snoop. It wasn't his style. But the preview on the screen caught his eye. "Can't wait to see you tonight." It was from a contact saved under the name Danielle W. ... Was clever. Emily didn't have any friends named Danielle, and John knew it. He stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, feeling the warmth of the setting sun pouring through the window. His heartbeat didn't spike. His hands didn't shake. If anything, he felt an odd sense of clarity. She came downstairs a few minutes later, phone in hand, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey babe, sorry, got caught up," she said, setting her phone in her purse. "No problem," John replied with an easy smile, pulling out her chair for her. He noticed she avoided his eyes for just a fraction of a second before thanking him. They ate, made small talk, laughed about a video her coworkers sent her. To anyone watching, it was a picture-perfect evening. But John's mind was already shifting gears, clicking into a mode he hadn't used since college, back when he used to play competitive chess. In chess, you didn't win by reacting to every move your opponent made. You won by thinking 10 moves ahead. And John, in that moment, decided he was going to win. After dinner, Emily kissed him on the cheek and went upstairs to catch up on emails. John poured himself a glass of bourbon, stepped out onto the back porch, and listened to the faint hum of traffic beyond the trees. Most men, finding out their wife might be cheating, would have confronted her then and there, shouted, demanded answers, thrown accusations like grenades in a marriage already primed to explode. His eyes fixed on the fading light of the horizon. He thought about the house, the one he had bought before they were married. He thought about the joint savings account, the car Emily drove, the contacts he had in real estate, law, and finance. He thought about the fact that Emily didn't know how meticulous he really was. When you're an architect, you learn to see the invisible lines, the structure beneath the surface. A marriage, John realized, had a structure too. He was about to dismantle it piece by piece until the whole thing collapsed. On her side only, he walked back inside, put the glass in the sink, and grabbed his phone. He opened a new contact, P.I. Mark Sky. His friend Mark had mentioned a private investigator once, a man who worked quietly and got results. Without drawing attention, John typed out a message. "Need to hire you for discreet surveillance? Cash payment. Call me tomorrow." He hit send and felt the first rush of adrenaline, not the hot, messy kind that comes from anger, but the cold, clean kind that comes from control. Emily came down later, hair damp, wearing one of his old t-shirts. She curled up next to him on the couch, smelling faintly of the lavender body wash she liked. "You okay?" Looking at him. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Just thinking about work." She nodded, kissed his cheek, and turned her attention to the TV. John watched her out of the corner of his eye. He didn't see the woman he had married 8 years ago. He saw an opponent, one who didn't even realize the game had started. She went upstairs for bed. John stayed downstairs a while longer. He opened his laptop, searched for GPS trackers, and ordered one small enough to fit discreetly under the dashboard of her Lexus. Same-day delivery. He closed the laptop. Finished his drink and leaned back in the chair. The cicadas were still singing outside, the same as they had been an hour ago. Nothing in the world seemed to have changed, but in John's mind, everything had. Cliffhanger ending. John stood by the window, looking at Emily's silhouette through the sheer curtains as she moved around their bedroom. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "If she wants to play games, I'll show her how they're really played." Chapter 2. Silent evidence. John had always been good at noticing patterns. The kind of skill that made him successful in architecture. Every building had a rhythm. Every building had a rhythm. A design that flowed logically from one detail to the next. People were no. When you paid close enough attention, you could spot the cracks forming long before a relationship collapsed. That Monday morning, Emily left for work in her tailored navy dress, a travel coffee mug in hand. Him a distracted kiss as she grabbed her keys. John watched from the doorway as she backed Alexis out of the driveway. The sunlight bouncing off the polished hood. He finished his coffee. Then retrieved the small package that had arrived the night before. Was a GPS tracker. No bigger than a key fob. By 9:15 a.m., John was in his garage lifting the hood. He crouched. Slid underneath and fixed the tracker in a spot that would be invisible without a detailed search. It was magnetic. Linked to a secure app on his phone. First ping came through at 12:42 p.m. Emily was parked at her office. So far, nothing unusual. But John knew the game wasn't won in a day. That evening, over takeout, Emily told him about a stressful meeting. Her tone was casual. John had always noticed that when she lied, her hands moved more than usual. He said, sipping his drink. Who was in the meeting? She listed names he didn't recognize. Quickly changed the subject. To a summer getaway she wanted them to plan. John smiled, nodding along, even making a note to look at flights. But the tracker told him she'd left work for an hour that afternoon. Parked in a lot across town. Near a boutique hotel. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern solidified. The tracker placed her in the same location in upscale complex near Ladybird Lake. The times varied, but the visits never lasted more than 2 hours. John didn't confront her. Instead, he began building his case. First step. He found his old iPhone 6 in a desk drawer. Factory reset it and loaded a discreet voice recording on Thursday morning after Emily left for work. He slipped the phone into the space behind their bedroom dresser that offered a direct line of sound to their bed and closet. Friday night, he got his first piece of hard evidence. Came home later than usual. Hair perfume stronger than normal. She showered quickly and went to bed. When she fell asleep, John retrieved the phone and transferred the recordings to his laptop. He heard the sound of drawers opening. A male voice, faint giggle, and a male voice murmuring something about next weekend. Emily's voice followed. Soft and intimate, I can't wait. He doesn't suspect a thing. John sat back in his chair, the glow of the laptop screen painting his face in cold light. He didn't feel rage, just a sharper, cleaner focus. By Sunday, he was ready for step 3. Professional surveillance. He met the private investigator. Gary in a quiet corner booth of a diner off the I-35. Gary was in his 50s. Face with a weathered and a way of looking at people like he could see straight through them. Mark said you needed discretion. Stirring his coffee. Proof. John replied. Photos, dates, times, and I need it without her ever knowing. Gary nodded. How serious are we talking? John slid a manila envelope across the table. lit hell.
$2,000 in cash,
$2,000
in
in
cash,
known routines,
and a list of Emily's known routines.
Serious enough too?
Serious
Pay
enough
you in
too?
advance, John said.
Pay you in advance.
3 days
John
later,
said.
Gary
3
called.
days later,
Got
Gary
something
called.
you'll want to see.
Got something you'll want to see.
That afternoon, John sat in his office.
John
scrolling
sat
through
in
an
his
email
office.
from Gary.
Scrolling through an email
Each
from
image
Gary.
was time-stamped.
Each
high
image was
resolution,
time-stamped,
and damning.
high resolution, and
Emily,
damning.
in her work
Emily,
clothes,
in her work
walking
clothes,
hand in hand with a tall man into the apartment complex.
into the apartment
The
complex.
same man
later
the same
holding
man
the door for her
later
at a
holding
jewelry
the door
store
for her at
downtown.
a jewelry store downtown.
His name,
Gotti confirmed.
His name,
was
Gotti
David
confirmed,
Harper.
was
a
David
senior
Harper,
creative at Emily's
a senior
marketing
creative
firm.
at Emily's
Divorced,
marketing firm.
mid-40s,
Divorced,
clean cut in that
mid-40s,
smug tech
clean
guy
cut in
way.
that smug tech guy
The
way.
kicker on photo.
The kicker
on
showed
photo.
Emily and David in the
Showed
engagement
Emily
ring
and David
section.
in the engagement ring section.
John stared at the screen.
John stared at
The edges of his vision sharpening
the
like
edges
a
of his
camera
vision
lens
sharpening
tightening
like a
its focus.
camera lens tightening its
She wasn't
focus.
just cheating.
She
was
wasn't
planning
just
a
cheating.
future with him.
She was planning a future
Later
with
that
him.
night,
Emily
night,
came home humming.
Emily
Her phone
came home
buzzing in her
humming,
purse.
her phone buzzing in her
She
purse.
sat beside John on the couch.
She sat beside
scrolling
John
Instagram
on the couch,
while pretending to
scrolling
watch
Instagram
TV.
while pretending to watch
John
TV.
glanced at her.
John's
His
face
face
unreadable.
His face
How
unreadable.
was work?
He asked.
How was work?
Busy, he asked, she said with a sigh.
Busy, she said
So
with a
many
sigh.
deadlines.
So many deadlines.
He smiled faintly, sipping
He
his
smiled
drink.
faintly, sipping his
Cliffhanger
drink.
ending. Cliffhanger
At
ending.
11:47 p.m.
At 11:47 p.m.
Long after Emily had fallen asleep.
Long after Emily had
John
fallen
opened
asleep.
Gary's email.
John opened
Again?
Gary's email
and clicked on
Again?
the last attachment
and
to
clicked
video
on the
clip.
last attachment to
In it,
video clip.
Emily leaned across
In
a
it,
small cafe
Emily
table.
leaned across a small
Kissed
cafe
David.
table,
Kissed
whispered
David.
something, and
That
whispered
made John's
something
jaw tighten.
that made John's jaw
3
tighten.
more months,
and
Three
I'll have
more
everything
months,
I need from him.
and I'll have everything I need.
John
from
closed
him.
the laptop slowly.
John closed the
wheels
laptop
turning
slowly.
in his.
The wheels
mind.
turning in his.
The game
mind.
wasn't just about
The
betrayal.
game
anymore.
wasn't just about betrayal.
It was
anymore.
about strategy.
It
She
was
had
about
just made her
strategy.
first big mistake.
She had just made her first big mistake.
Chapter 3. Shifting the chess pieces the next morning. John woke up before Emily. She was curled up on her side, hair fanned out across the pillow. Phone clutched loosely in one hand like a teenager who couldn't bear to be separated from it. He moved quietly, moored, dressed, and made coffee. By the time she came downstairs, he was already at the kitchen island, laptop open, sipping from his mug like it was any other Thursday. If Emily noticed his calmness, she didn't say anything. She was in a rush, chattering about a big meeting. While half listening to his responses, John let her go, kissed her on the cheek, and watched from the window as she drove away. The moment her car disappeared, he shut the laptop, grabbed his phone, and dialed Mark. Mark Spencer had been John's friend since college. But more importantly, he was a corporate attorney with a knack for finding loopholes where others saw roadblocks. "Talk to me, Mark," said when he picked up. "I need to move some assets," John replied. "Quietly, legally, and I don't want her seeing a single change until it's too late." Mark was silent for a beat. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure about anything, all right," Mark said. "We'll start with accounts. You've got joint checking and savings, right?" "Yeah, and a brokerage account, in my name only." "Good. First things, stop direct deposits to the joint account. Have everything rerouted to a new personal account she doesn't know about. I'll send you the paperwork." By noon, John had opened a high-security personal account at a different bank, moving over his direct deposits and linking it to a trust, in his name only. That afternoon, he went over every shared asset with a fine-tooth comb. House, purchased before marriage. Deeds still solely in his name due to inheritance funds used for the down payment. That was untouchable. Emily's Lexus, technically leased under John's small LLC, he used for side projects completely within his right to recall. Joint credit cards, he paid the balances in full and removed his name from hers. Closing access. On his side, life insurance. Beneficiary changed from Emily to his sister. Rachel, that night, over dinner, Emily chatted about a team-building retreat happening next month in Dallas. John nodded along, even offering to help her pack when the time came. She had no idea that while she was talking, John was making mental check marks beside each step of his plan. The next week, he called in a favor from a client, a real estate developer who owed him for a rushed project he'd designed last year. "I need to buy a property in cash," John said, quietly. "Under my LLC, What kind of property? An apartment, John replied. Downtown? Lease already signed? I just want to buy out the unit and terminate it. The developer chuckled. Sounds personal. It is, John said simply. While these moves played out in the background, John was also busy laying social groundwork. At a charity gala hosted by the Austin Arts Foundation, he spotted Alan Pierce, CEO of Emily's marketing firm. The man was sipping champagne, schmoozing with donors, clearly enjoying the attention. John approached, shook his hand firmly, and complimented the company's latest ad campaign. They made small talk, but John was careful to drop a subtle line. Emily's been distracted lately. I hope it's not affecting her work. Alan raised an eyebrow. Distracted? John just smiled faintly. Nothing to worry about yet. But if you notice anything unusual, give me a call. He handed over his card. It wasn't a direct accusation, just a seed. It was planted in fertile ground. By the third week of his operation, John had closed all joint credit lines, redirected all income, secured legal ownership of the house and business assets, purchased the apartment. Emily planned to move into without her knowledge. Every step was perfectly legal, paper-trailed and airtight. One night, as they watched Netflix on the couch, Emily scrolled through her phone, smirking at something on the screen. She didn't notice John glance over. On her phone was a message from David. Can't wait for this weekend. After that, everything changes. John's stomach didn't twist. His pulse didn't race. He just reached for the remote and turned up the volume. In chess, sometimes the most devastating move wasn't the queen's dramatic sweep, it was the quiet positioning of a pawn, patiently moving toward the other side of the board. Cliffhanger. Ending a few days later. Mark called him after reviewing the final round of legal adjustments. If you're going to do this, John, Mark said, his voice low and steady, you need to be ready to finish her. There's no going back once you pull the trigger. John looked out at the backyard, where the sun was dipping below the fence line, and said, I'm not just ready. I've already started. Chapter 4, Setting the Trap. The best traps don't look like traps at all. They look like gifts, kindnesses, even olive branches. John knew this from years of business negotiations. Make your opponent feel comfortable, and they'll walk right into the snare on their own. So, he became the husband Emily thought she was outsmarting, the illusion of normalcy. John started small. He cooked her favorite meals. He asked about her day and actually listened, nodding in all the right places. On Sunday mornings, he brought her coffee in bed and suggested they spend more time together. Emily's guard dropped. She smiled. Maura touched his arm when she laughed, even leaned against him on the couch. To an outsider, they'd look like a couple in love again. But John noticed the little tells, the way her phone was always face down, the way she sometimes forgot to wear her wedding ring, the way her eyes flicked toward the door whenever she heard a text notification, every time she lied. He smiled a little inside. The house maneuvered 2 weeks into the charade. John quietly visited the county recorder's office. Thanks to the inheritance clause in the house's deed, he was able to file an amendment reaffirming sole ownership, something Emily would never see unless she went digging through legal archives. When he left the office, the clerk handed him the official stamped document. John folded it neatly, slid it into his briefcase. Dan drove home feeling like a man holding the deed to the final act. Leverage on David Gary. The private investigator came through again. One Thursday evening, over a late dinner at a quiet steakhouse, he slid a file across the table. Your boy David has a past, Gary said. Inside the folder were records, a misdemeanor fraud charge from 7 years ago, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend, and evidence of questionable financial dealings with a startup that had since collapsed. John read every page. He's already thinking of ways to use it. Emily thought she was trading up. She had no idea she was stepping into a fire. The romantic weekend by the end of the month. John had all the pieces in place. Told Emily he'd booked a weekend getaway for them at a lakeside resort, a chance to reconnect. Her eyes lit up. That sounds amazing, babe. What she didn't know was that John had chosen the weekend very carefully, the same one she had secretly planned to be away with David. Sure enough, the next day he overheard her in the kitchen, speaking. in a hushed tone into her phone, "Don't worry, I'll figure it out. He'll never suspect anything." The final bait John played his part flawlessly. He bought her a new dress for the trip, made a dinner reservation for the first night, and even arranged for champagne to be waiting in the hotel room. The while, he knew she was coordinating with David behind his back. The GPS tracker showed her making multiple stops near his apartment complex in the days leading up to the weekend. The recordings from the bedroom iPhone confirmed it. They were planning to be together as soon as she could slip away. Friday morning, John loaded their bags into the trunk and drove them to the resort. He played the doting husband, holding her hand, making her laugh. By late afternoon, Emily claimed she wasn't feeling well and needed to rest in the room. John kissed her forehead, told her to take it easy, and stepped out for a walk. In reality, he drove straight back, home where movers were waiting. The quiet before the storm over the next 48 hours. John executed the first stage of his plan. The Lexus was recalled to his LLC under the terms of the lease. Joint bank accounts were locked. Emily's access to credit cards was revoked. All of her personal belongings were carefully boxed and placed in the garage. The movers were efficient, professional, and discreet. By Sunday evening, the house looked exactly as it had when John bought it years ago, and no trace of Emily's presence. The text that changed everything while John was finalizing the last of the paperwork. His phone buzzed. It was Emily. "John, something's wrong. My cards aren't working. My phone bill is unpaid. What the hell's going on?" John stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "I know," and hit send. Cliffhanger ending. Emily called immediately, her voice a mix of panic and anger. "John, talk to me, what's happening?" He smiled to himself and said, "I'll explain when you get home." Then he hung up. Chapter 7. The permanent lockout for John. Revenge was never about short-term satisfaction. It was about control, complete, irreversible control. Emily had lost her comfort, her reputation, and her safety net. But John knew there was always a chance she'd try to worm her way back in. That wasn't going to happen. The legal firewall first, John met with his attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Marissa Cole who had a reputation for dismantling opponents in court. Marissa didn't just handle divorce filings. She went for scorched earth. They finalized exclusive ownership of assets, all property titles, vehicles, and investment accounts placed in his name only. Restraining clause. Emily couldn't come within 500 feet of his home or office without prior written consent. Financial separation. Any lingering joint debts were refinanced under her name. Wiping them from his credit entirely, Marissa smiled as she slid the stack of documents toward him. "Once the judge signs off, she's a ghost in your financial life." The digital cutoff / came the online purge. John changed passwords for everything: bank accounts, streaming services, airline rewards programs, even grocery delivery. He updated two-factor authentication to a new phone number and email Emily didn't know existed. Every trace of her was scrubbed, old photos archived to an encrypted drive. Social media blocked, mutual group chats quietly left. This wasn't petty, it was tactical. If she couldn't reach him digitally, she couldn't even begin to reinsert herself. The professional immunity John also made sure their professional worlds would never overlap again. He joined a new networking group, one with strict vetting and a membership list Emily could never penetrate at the same time. He had a discreet conversation with a few key industry contacts, framing it as a heads-up about a complicated personal matter. Translation: if Emily tried to leverage his name for work connections, the door would slam shut before she even knocked. The social lockjaw didn't unfriend or block every mutual acquaintance he didn't need to. Instead, he curated his presence. He posted photos of himself with new people at upscale events, hiking trails, and business trips. Nothing over the top, just enough to suggest his life was moving on without a trace of bitterness. The absence of Emily in those moments sent its own message. She was no longer part of his narrative. The surprise court date 2 weeks later. Emily got a rude awakening? Marissa had arranged for an expedited court hearing. The judge reviewed the evidence, photos, GPS logs, financial records, and approved the divorce settlement in a single session. Emily sat across from John in the courtroom, visibly shaken. She tried to speak, but the judge cut her off. "Ms. Harper, the evidence is clear. The settlement stands." John didn't look at her once. The apartment's seal, one final loose end remained. The downtown apartment she'd tried to secure with David. John had already terminated the lease. But he went further. He signed a short-term lease himself, not to live there, but to keep the unit off the market until the building's policy barred her from reapplying for at least 12 months. It was a quiet move, one Emily wouldn't even realize until she tried to rent there again. The last attempt late one evening, John's doorbell rang. Through the security camera feed, he saw Emily standing there, hair messy, his eyes red. She didn't knock again, just stood there for nearly a minute before walking back to her car. John saved the footage to his encrypted drive, labeling it final. Visit no contact, the clean slate by the end of the month. Emily had no access to his money, his home, his social circles, or his professional world. She was locked out in every conceivable way. John didn't celebrate. He didn't pour a drink or call friends. He simply sat in his study, closed the last folder of legal documents, and exhaled. The war was over. Cliffhanger ending. A week later, an unexpected letter arrived in his mailbox, no return address. Just his name in messy handwriting. Inside was a single sentence: "You'll regret this." John placed it in a drawer and shut it without a word. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. Chapter 8. The Epilogue. Walking away revenge doesn't bring back trust. It doesn't erase betrayal. Doesn't even give you peace, not right away. But it does clear the board, so you can start fresh. The first quiet morning, it had been 3 months since the court finalized everything. John woke up in his own bed, in his own home, with no tension in the air, no half-truths hanging in the space between two people. He brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and realized something he hadn't felt in years. His house felt safe. Letter in the drawer, the threatening note Emily had sent, still sat in his desk drawer. He never responded, never called the police. He knew silence would frustrate her more than any reaction. In his mind, she was already gone. The note was just proof that the door he'd closed was one she still desperately wanted to open. The lakeside return in a crisp Saturday morning. John drove back to the lakeside resort where the whole chain of events had started. This time he didn't bring evidence folders or strategic plans, just a fishing rod and a paperback novel. Sitting on the dock, he realized the place didn't remind him of Emily anymore. The air smelled of cedar and water, not betrayal. A conversation with Alon a month later. Alan Pierce invited him to lunch again. "You handled it better than most," Alan said between bites. Quiet, deliberate, no drama, you know. Be hell in corporate negotiations. John smiled. "I've had practice. It's a new circle by summer." John's social life looked nothing like it had before. He'd made friends through hiking groups, professional meets, and neighbors. He'd barely spoken to while married. They knew nothing about Emily, and he liked it that way. His story was no longer defined by her actions. It was defined by where he went next. The unexpected apology one evening. John's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know I can't undo what I did. I just want you to know I'm sorry." He stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. He didn't need closure from her. Closure had come the day he took his life back. The final reflection looking back. John knew the revenge had been calculated, even cold. Some might call it cruel, but it had been the only way to ensure she could never harm him again. He hadn't yelled, "Act!" smashed things, or begged for explanations. He'd simply removed her from every part of his life, methodically and completely. It hadn't been about making her suffer, it had been about making himself free. Walking away. A warm September evening, John stood in his driveway watching the sunset over the neighborhood. The air was still. The war was over. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to plan, nothing left to protect, nothing left to win. He turned, went inside, and shut the door behind him, not to lock anyone out. but to finally live without looking over his shoulder. Final line: revenge had been the weapon. Freedom was the reward.